All right, let's jump right into what is basically an intellectual detective story. We're going to look into the mind of a young German seminarian, a guy named Joseph Ratzinger, decades before anyone knew him as Pope Benedict XVI. And what we're going to do is uncover this really foundational choice he made early on, a choice that honestly would shape his entire life's work.
And this quote right here, this is our main clue. It just lays bare this deep dissatisfaction that the young Ratzinger was feeling. He's searching for answers, right? But the official theology of his day, it just wasn't cutting it. It felt, as he said, impersonal, like some dry, dusty textbook. He was looking for something with a pulse.
So let's set the scene a little. Picture it. We're in post-World War II Europe. An entire generation is just grappling with this unbelievable tragedy, asking these huge, burning questions about life and existence. And, when you're facing that kind of suffering, abstract, tidy answers just feel hollow. And right in the middle of all this is a young Ratzinger, searching for a way to think about faith that felt real, a faith that had, in his own words, flesh and blood. Now, the standard way of doing things back then, the official curriculum in theology, was this thing called neo-Thomism. The easiest way to think about it is as this highly logical, incredibly neat and tidy system built on the philosophy of Thomas Aquinas. It's all about reason, structure, and getting to these clear, rational answers. But here's where the clash happens. Because while neo-Thomism was all systematic and logical, to the young Ratzinger, it just felt rigid and, well, dry. He said it was far afield from my own questions. It was missing the messy human part of faith. The struggle, the doubt, the whole journey. It was like this perfect system that didn't really have room for imperfect people. And this is where our story really takes a turn. Because Ratzinger, feeling unfulfilled by what was in front of him, he looked way back into the past. And there, he found a guide from the ancient world who, to him, felt shockingly modern. He discovers St. Augustine. And look, this isn't about finding some dusty historical figure in a library. For Ratzinger, reading Augustine wasn't like reading a textbook at all. It felt more like having a conversation. And he said it himself. Listen to this. Augustine was a friend, a contemporary who speaks to me. I mean, that's the complete opposite of the impersonal theology he was used to. Augustine felt alive, like he was wrestling with real questions, and Ratzinger just felt this immediate, really profound connection. So why Augustine? What was the big deal? Well, it's because Augustine's own life was a journey. He wrote so openly about his personal struggles, his dramatic conversion. He presented faith not as this static system you just learn, but as a passionate, messy search for truth. This existential liveliness, as they call it, was exactly what Ratzinger felt was missing. Okay, so Ratzinger didn't just admire Augustine from afar, he actually put this new perspective to work. For his doctoral thesis, we're talking his first major academic project, he decided to completely rethink the nature of the church, but through this new Augustinian lens he discovered. And the core idea he grabbed onto was the church as the people and house of God. Now, that might sound kind of simple, but it was actually a pretty radical shift. It moves the focus away from the church as this perfect, static institution, and instead views it as a living, breathing, moving community of actual people. So, following Augustine, he starts to see the church as moving through history in these stages. First, its roots are deep in the people of Israel. Then, through baptism, it expands. It becomes this spiritual community for all nations. And finally, it's always journeying toward its ultimate goal, the heavenly church, that final community of all believers. You see, it's a body in motion. Ratzinger even got inspired by these ancient mosaics from Augustine's time. They showed the church as a visible mother, a building made not out of dead rock, but of living stones, the people themselves. The point is, the church wasn't just some abstract idea. It was a real historical community that you can actually see and touch. And this is a really crucial point. This traveling community wasn't some exclusive club for perfect people. Nope. Augustine's vision, the one Ratzinger embraced, was super realistic. The church is a messy field, with both wheat and weeds, a hospital for sinners, all of them just journeying together toward the same place. Now, you might be thinking, okay, this is all just internal church stuff, right? But for Ratzinger, thinking about the church as this real historical community on a journey, well, it forced him to ask a much bigger question. What is reality itself? And that question led him straight into the biggest philosophical debates out there about truth and freedom. So, yeah, how does thinking about the church as a journey connect to these giant philosophical questions? For Ratzinger, that link was absolutely everything. He saw this trend happening in modern thought, this tendency to try and do philosophy without asking the most basic question of all. What does it even mean to be? What is existence? And for him, trying to separate questions of what's true from the fundamental question of what is, that's a dead end. He thought if you refuse to ground your thinking in reality, then you're basically giving up on the possibility of finding any truth at all. And the stakes here, for him, were incredibly high. Ratzinger argued that if you don't have a foundation in objective reality, our ideas about freedom just become unmoored. They float away. We risk becoming enslaved to our own whims, becoming, in his powerful words, tools of self-alienation. So here it is, the absolute core of his entire philosophical project. For Ratzinger, you just can't separate these things. The search for truth, the search for the real meaning of freedom, it's all ultimately tied to the question of God, the very source of being and reality itself. So, after this incredible intellectual journey, from a young seminarian's nagging questions to these huge philosophical debates, what's the big takeaway? What was forged in the making of this mind? Well, what Ratzinger built for himself, with Augustine as his guide, was this really powerful synthesis. It's a vision of faith that isn't just a set of abstract rules, but is rooted in a real personal encounter. It's a theology that takes history seriously. It's a use of reason that doesn't close itself off to the great mystery of existence. And it's all driven by this constant, passionate search for objective truth. And that kind of leaves us with one last thought. Ratzinger's life's work was really a response to the challenges he saw in his own time. So it makes you wonder, right? In our own age of pretty radical skepticism, what's the value of a faith that doesn't ask you to abandon your reason, but instead claims to be its ultimate fulfillment? Now that's a question worth chewing on.